So in today's lesson, we'll be looking at it is exercise 12.07, which is how to find the equation of a line. So for each graph below, complete a table of values and use it to find the equation of a line. So we've got a line here that is going up from left to right, and we have to fill in these table of values by just finding the y values given the x values that are there already. So that -1 right there, okay, as an x value, if we just go all the way down, hit the red line and go across, we see the number -4, okay? At 0, x equals 0, the y value here is -3, so I'm going to put -3 there. At 1, the y value is -2, and at number 2, the y value is -1. Okay, now once we've got our table of values ready, what we got to do is find out how much of my y value is the y value increasing up by. It is obviously increasing up by 1. Okay, and what you start off with is y equals to that number 1, okay, written before x. So it's y equals 1x, okay? Now, after you do that, the number that goes afterwards, okay, is called our y-intercept, okay? Now, that y-intercept is basically where it hits the y-axis right there, okay? So the part that I've highlighted in green, this part here, -3, is what goes next after that, okay? The other way you can actually see that is looking at the pair of values where x equals 0. So it's this part here, okay? So that number, -3, just goes down here, okay? There is another way to do that I explained in our previous video, which is to figure out that number by writing 1x first, and then there's some value here. And maybe if you wanted to substitute in 2 maybe as x, okay, and then there's some plus or minus value here that would make it equal to -1, which is this value. You can figure that out. So 1 times 2 is 2, and 2 has to minus by 3 to give you -1, and hence y equals to 1x minus 3. So that's the other way to do it if you really wanted to do it that way. Okay. Otherwise, I'm happy for you to just write down what the y value is underneath x equals 0. Okay. It's going to be, it's the same thing. So at x equals to -2 over here, if we just go all the way down, hit that red line and go across, we'll get to -4. Whereas if we started with -1 as our x value, we would go to -3. At x equals 0, our y value here is -2. And at x as 1, our y value is -1. Okay? Right. So again, what is this going up by? This is again going up by just 1 every single time. Okay? Now there's a technical term for this. It's called the gradient, but that's used more in year 9 onwards. So we're just going to put that number 1 right before the x. Okay, so right, y equals 1x. Then the number that goes afterwards here is the number right below x equals 0. So I'm just going to highlight that part, okay, that you got to look at. So there's x equals 0. The number right below that is y equals -2, and that is our y-intercept, which is where that red line hits the y-axis, and that belongs right there. Okay, so our equation is y equals 1x minus 2. Now, I forgot to tell you that you don't have to write it that way. For both equations, okay, part A and part B, you can write y equals x minus 3 and y equals to x minus 2. Okay, so you don't have to write that one in front, and those two are your solutions. Okay, right. Let's go on to the next question. So, question E, this is different from question A and B, only because if you look at A and B, they're both pointing upwards, okay? So that's why the number before the x here that I'm pointing out is a 1. Let's see how it behaves when the line goes down. So again, we have to fill in a table of values. We're given some x values. We have to find out what the y values are. So when x equals -1, the y value here, okay, if you hit that red line and go across to the y-axis, it's 1. Whereas at x equals 0, y is also equal to 0. So that is also called the origin. And when x equals 1, y is -1. When x is 2, y is -2, which is down here. Okay, so now have a look at what's happening to these values from left to right. Okay, they are going down by 1. So if they're going down by 1, that means -1 every single time. So when we write the equation, the number before the x value is simply that value, the -1 there. Okay, and again, you don't have to write -1x, you can just write -x. That means the same thing. Then I'll point out the same thing as before. The extra number that goes at the end here, whether you plus or minus a number, that number there is right below x equals 0, which is right here. Okay, so that number that goes there is just 0. But if you think about it, if you plus 0 to anything, it's just going to be the same thing. So you don't have to even have to put that there. So our equation of this line is y equals -x. All right, let's have a look at f. When x is -3, okay, what y value do we get? We get, oh, that is a number that's not written, but that should be 5. And then when x equals -2, you can see that y is 4. When x is -1, y is 3. And when x is 0, y is 2. Okay? Right, so you can evidently see that these numbers here are again going down by 1. Okay, so since they're going down by 1, we're going to put that number right before the x. Okay, so instead of -1x, I'm just going to write -x. And the number that goes afterwards is our y-intercept, which is where this line crosses the y-axis, which is at 2. You can also find that value in the table, so x equals 0. Okay, that's there. So there's my +2 there, and that's my equation of that line. Okay, right. Moving on. One other thing you got to know today is horizontal and vertical lines. So horizontal lines go from left to right, and then vertical lines go from bottom to the top. Okay, or top to bottom. So there are equations that we can generate, okay, when we see horizontal lines and vertical lines. So the equation of a horizontal line is of the form y equals c. Okay, so meaning they have all the same y values. And the equation for a vertical line is on the form x equals c, meaning they have all the x values. And we're going to demonstrate that to you just by looking at these two examples here. So you have to write that down after, okay? But find the equation of each line here, right? So this is a horizontal line, obviously, for part A. And we're just going to have a look at the y values for each x value here. So I've written down x values of -1, 0, 1, and 2. Let's find x as -1 right there. And if we analyze the y value, okay, that is indeed -2. Okay. And then when we find out what y value is for x equals 0, it is also -2. Okay. Y value for y value for 1 and y value for 2 is still going to the left to the y-axis as -2. They're all -2s. So see how all of these values here, and I'm just highlighting, okay, all these values here are -2, and they are y values. So we're going to say that this equation of the line is y equals -2. In fact, I'll just write that right there so you can see that. Now, as for the next question, this is a vertical line. Okay. Now, if we did the same thing as before and we put out like, -1, 0, 1, and 2 as our x values, there's not really a point there, here, and here. There's only points along this line, okay, which is a vertical line. So you know what? I'm just going to do something different. Let's just say if I have these 4 values, okay? What coordinates are they? The first coordinate here is going to be x equals 1, but y equals 0. The next value here is going to be x equals to 1 also, but y equals to 1. So it's 1, 1. Okay, basically as a point. And the next one's going to be 1, 2. And the next one's going to be 1, 3. Okay, so if you have a look at our table of values now, there is a row full of ones, which is right here. Okay, which means that our equation of this line is in fact x equals 1. All right, so now just to summarize, a horizontal line has an equation y equals something. Okay, and the easy way I remember that is by looking at the horizontal line and what that number crosses on the y-axis. Okay, so it's crossing the y-axis, so it should be y equals something, and it's going to cross y equals -2. This vertical line is crossing the x-axis, so it has to be x equals something, and the x value is 1. Okay, so I can give you another example here to do with both of them. So if I have, let's say, for example, this line here, I'm just going to draw a little bit thicker. Here we go. So if I draw that a little bit thicker, that horizontal line is crossing the y-axis at 2. So I'm going to say that's y equals 2. If I draw a line here on the other diagram, that vertical line is crossing the x-axis at -3. So that's just x equals -3. Okay, so whilst you're drawing any of these lines, you have to make sure you also draw those arrows at the end just to indicate that they keep going, they're continuous lines. Okay,